Good morning for those colleagues who are online. Miss Andrea Sousa Pintos, could you please turn your camera on? Thank you. And could you say a few words so we can check your connection? Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Can you hear me there? I can hear you.
The sound is it's a little bit faded. Could you speak louder?
What about now? Is that better?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you. Do you have PowerPoint slides to be streamed or not?
I will share my own slides. I have shared the deck with Svetlana.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to test the sharing?
Yes, if I can try sharing. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Yes, all good.
Thank you.
We're going to start in a few minutes. We're waiting for the second speaker to connect. I'm going to...
Well, good morning, colleagues. My name is Matthew Wilson, the Ambassador of Barbados, and I'm your moderator for today. But first of all, happy World Environment Day. As you know, the theme this year is climate change, now for climate. Now, as we are coming to the end of a fascinating trade and environment week, but you all know a week like this would not be complete without a discussion on plastics pollution. Not when we have such an active DPP community in the WTO, and also not when we can see some of the re-engagement at the global level on the plastics treaty negotiations. But today, however, is not about problems and is also not about negotiations. It is about solutions and opportunities as we focus on the trade-related solutions to address plastics pollution and advance the role of alternatives and substitutes. Now, I think we can all agree that plastics pollution has become one of the most visible environmental challenges of our economies today, especially for small island developing states and other vulnerable economies. We can also agree that around the world, many governments are taking action to reduce unnecessary plastic waste, especially around single-use plastics. They're also trying to improve waste management systems, promote circularity, and encourage the development of more sustainable products and business models. As these efforts expand, an increasingly important question is, what comes next? If governments restrict certain single-use plastic products, what alternatives are available? How do we ensure that they are environmentally sound, safe, affordable, and accessible? And how can international trade help scale up the solutions that work and also provide opportunities for developing country members in particular to be part of this new value chain? And these are some of the questions that we here at the WTO have been exploring through the dialogue on plastics pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade, the DPP. And over the past few years, members have shared a remarkable range of experiences. We've discussed alternatives made from bamboo. You would have seen a wonderful display outside, and I've been promised at least to get one of those pencils, right? Yeah. Agriculture residues, mushroom-based materials, paper, glass, and other natural resources, and my personal favorite, seaweed. We've explored reuse and refill systems, deposit return schemes, and reusable packaging models, and the services that support them, from cleaning and logistics to certification and traceability. At the same time, members have highlighted a number of challenges. It may be counterintuitive, but in many cases, sustainable substitutes face higher tariffs than conventional plastic products. As my niece and nephew will tell me, the math is just not mathing. Businesses, especially MSMEs, have to navigate multiple certification requirements and differing standards, hence increasing the cost of them doing business. And there are legitimate questions about how do we assess the environmental performance, including through lifestyle assessments, so that we can avoid replacing one environmental problem with another. And as we know, humanity has become far too efficient at replacing one problem with another. So today's excellent panel will explore these questions from a range of perspectives. We'll begin by looking at the broader challenge of plastics pollution and the role of innovation, technology, and international cooperation in addressing it. We will then examine the growing landscape of alternatives and substitutes, including the applications they can serve, the environmental considerations associated with their use, and the importance of lifestyle assessments in identifying solutions that are both effective and sustainable. Building on this foundation, we will hear practical experiences from the Pacific region and discuss how locally available materials and regional initiatives can contribute to reducing plastics pollution while creating new economic opportunities. We'll also explore the role of trade policies in supporting the development and uptake of alternatives before concluding with a discussion on how international cooperation can help address remaining barriers and make environmentally sound substitutes and alternatives more competitive, more accessible, and more scalable. Now, this is a lot to cover in a relatively short period of time, but I really look forward to a rich discussion. And I will invite our first speaker to begin. And I believe that they're joining us online. And our first speaker is Ms. Andrea Sosa Pintos, the Program Director of the Indo-Pacific Plastics Innovation Network at CSIRO, which is Australia's national science agency. And she leads regional programs across Southeast Asia that connect science, innovation, and entrepreneurship with the policy, market, and financing pathways needed to support the scale-up of solutions to plastic pollution, with a focus on designing for inclusion and equitable outcomes. So, Andrea, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. I'll share my slides and hopefully you can confirm that you can see my screen. And thank you for the opportunity to join and celebrate Environment Week with you. Joining from Sydney, Australia, is a good time to spend my Friday evening. So when we talk about plastic pollution, it's often described as a waste problem, but in practice, it is also a connectivity problem. It sits at the intersection of science, markets, policy, infrastructure, and trade. So today I want to share how regional collaboration can help move practical solutions beyond pilot stage and into real world use. And the scale of the problem is significant. I think, as all of you are aware, we produce an incredible amount of plastics, and annually we produce around 350 million tons of plastic waste. 40% of the plastic waste comes from packaging, and between 1 and 2 million tons enter the oceans annually. And if we continue at the current track, by 2050, there will be more plastics than fish in the ocean. And so what this is telling us is something important, that plastic pollution is not only about how much plastic we produce, but it is also about how waste is managed and whether systems are in place to prevent leakage into the environment. And this is where geographically matters. In this slide, we can see that the hotspot is across Asia, and plastics moves through rivers, coastlines, and supply chains. It crosses borders. Much of the risk is concentrated in the Indo-Pacific, where there is rapid growth, complex coastlines, and uneven waste systems, meaning that interventions can have a particularly high impact. And this is why this matters not just environmentally, but economically and regionally. As we said, plastic knows no borders, and neither do the systems needed to address it. And that was the starting point for the Indo-Pacific Plastics Innovation Network, or IPIN, an initiative that started in Australia with support from the Australian government. From our experience, the issue is not that solutions do not exist, because they do. The issue is that too many of them are not scaling. And often the reason is not lack of activity, it is lack of connection. Connection between researchers and industry, between entrepreneurs and investors, between policy ambition and implementation on the ground. And so IPIN was designed to work in that gap, to make sure that we help identify who is already working across the plastics life cycle, bring those actors together and create the conditions for collaboration. That means supporting partnerships across the sector, and also means helping promising solutions strengthen their capability, improve investment readiness, and connect into broader innovation ecosystems. So the role of IPIN is not only to support innovation, it is to help create the conditions that allow innovation to succeed. Our purpose is simple. It is to support the design and scale up of solutions that can shift the dial on plastic waste across the Indo-Pacific. And we do that in a way that is locally led, grounded in partnerships, and regionally connected. This is not something that one organization or one country can do alone. IPIN is built on strategic partnerships across the region, including government counterparts, research institutions, innovation agencies, and implementation partners. And those partnerships matter because the scaling solutions requires alignment across many parts of the system. It's not only about inventing something new, it is about making that solution relevant, investable, and deployable in a real context. And so how we support change is by making sure that we support the journey through what we call a seed to scale approach. It starts with ideation, bringing diverse stakeholders together to define the problem and generate solutions. Then capacity building through incubation, accelerator programs, technical assistance, and expert coaching. Building partnerships and connectivity, linking research, entrepreneurship, industry, policy, and finance. And finally, scale-up support, helping ventures access markets, funding opportunities, and co-investment pathways. In other words, IPIN is designed to help move promising ideas out of isolation and into the real economy. IPIN has been operating since 2022, and since then, we have seen some promising change. We are now seeing some early evidence of what this approach can unlock. So far, we have supported 165 teams, engaged more than 4,000 participants, and connected the stakeholders across 15 countries. We have also catalyzed more than 100 cross-border collaborations and supported $2 million in applied research through IPIN grants, unlocking over $6 million in co-investment. But what these numbers are showing us is not just program activity. They show a growing regional connectivity, stronger pathways between actors, and increasing momentum around solutions that can scale. And this is where trade becomes highly relevant, because even the strongest innovations cannot scale if it cannot move across markets, meet buyer requirements, or comply with standards. As you can see here in this slide, about 80% of global trade is affected by standards. And in the plastic space, they are essential for quality, safety, interoperability, and trust. So from our perspective, scaling solutions is not only about the technology itself, it is also about whether enabling environments exist for those solutions to circulate, to compete, and to grow. And that is why trade policy, standards, and market access are not secondary issues, they are central to implementation. Let me make that concrete with one example. Nuplas is a Malaysian startup that joined IPIN to explore expansion into the Indonesian market, focus on abandoned fishing gear or ghost nests, which are among one of the most harmful forms of marine plastic pollution. The scale of the challenge is substantial, with around 640,000 tons of fishing gears lost or discarded annually. Through IPIN, Nuplas built cross-border partnerships linking Malaysian innovation with Indonesian systems. They also had access to research and evidence to better understand local conditions and design better and more inclusive solutions. And importantly, the program supported pathways to enter and operate in the Indonesian market. Working directly with over 500 fishers, their innovation converts discarded fishing nets into high-quality recycled plastic pellets for manufacturing. What matters from a trade perspective is that this moves beyond a local waste intervention and it creates a tradable material. Nuplas has since progressed from pilot activity in Southeast Asia to exporting into international markets, including Europe, where they need to meet stringent quality and standards requirements. So this case study shows that scale requires more than innovation. It requires partnerships, research, market access, and the ability to operate across borders. And Nuplas is not an isolated case. We invite you to visit our website for more examples of how connecting regionally can unlock innovation. So to close, I want to leave you with one simple idea. The solutions to plastic pollution are emerging, and in many cases, they already exist. The real challenge is creating the conditions that allow them to scale, and it means recognizing that trade has a practical role to play in enabling standards, market access, investment, and the movement of solutions across borders. If we can strengthen those connections, we can move from isolated pilots to real-world impact at scale. Thank you so much, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. Really, really fascinating. And, you leave us with a lot of food for thought. More plastics and fish in the ocean if we continue along our current trajectory. There are solutions, but they're not being scaled up. And there's a very, very strong linkage between research, industry, implementation, and trade. We will have a question and answer session at the end, but I do have one follow-up question for you based on what you just showcased on NUPLAS. So, I mean, you very clearly said that there's certain trade conditions that need to be in place, standards, market access. But get a little bit more granular for me and tell us here in the House of Trade what more we can do to help some of these solutions be a little bit more scalable. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. From our experience, what we see is that when entrepreneurs come up with ideas, they understand the problem at the local level, but they have challenges to try to scale up those solutions and to really create a market opportunity that will attract investment for those solutions to really be viable as a business. A lot of the times they are really lost about what policies or what regulations apply. So having clear and aligned policy signals that entrepreneurs can understand, that is quite critical and quite important for these ideas to be able to scale up. Standards also play a central role. They define what constitutes acceptable alternatives, enable products to enter markets, and also reduces uncertainty for manufacturers, importers, and regulators. In addition to that, market access and functioning supply chains are essential. And so solutions need the ability to move inputs, technologies, and end products across borders and to connect into regional value chains to achieve a scale. Finance, we keep hearing about we need more money to be able to scale up these ideas. So access to finance and being able to de-risk those mechanisms is key, particularly in developing country contexts. So many solutions stall at the pilot stage due to that high upfront costs. And in research, we call it the value of this, which is where a great idea performs great in the lab, it becomes a great prototype, but then it really struggles to have enough support to be able to make it into the real world. And finally, and this is one that I believe is very important and it's been one of the biggest learnings from EPIN, is a stronger links between research, industry, policy, and implementation. Many solutions already exist, as I mentioned before, but scaling requires that bridging that gap between the evidence, the commercial application, the local context where solutions are going to be deployed, and having a common understanding, a common language for these things to be born at the local level, but then hopefully being deployed and not having to reinvent the wheel at the regional level. So overall, a scale is enabled when policy, standards, markets, and finance are aligned, allowing those solutions to transition from promising pilots to commercially viable and widely adopted models. Knowledge sharing is key, and we hope that we see more and more opportunities to continue to share learnings, opportunities, and connect the stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And one particular thing I take from you for us here is that we probably in the trade community need to be a little bit better at showcasing the availability of information that we have on the policies and standards that already exist so that entrepreneurs know how they can use them. Thank you so much. So now, colleagues, we're going to turn to our second presenter, Manuela Kiel, an environmental economist in the Trade and Environment team at the OECD Environment Directorate. She's experienced in working across topics including trade in plastics, trade in biodiversity, trade in climate, and trade in water, and trade in everything else. She's leading the development of an OECD report on the role of trade for sustainable plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes. Fantastic. Manuela, over to you, please.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here from the OECD and to share a trade and environmental perspective on tackling plastic pollution through plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes. Sorry, the clicker's not responding. There we go. So building on the OECD's long-standing work on tackling plastic pollution, I would like to share an overview of some key numbers from recent OECD reports, especially from the one that you see on the bottom right side of the slide. Firstly, OECD estimates that global annual plastic production and use in 2020 reached 435 million tons. So that's over 800 tons per minute. And around 20 million tons of macroplastics leaked to aquatic and terrestrial environments in 2020. And without stronger policy action, by 2040, global leakage to the environment would reach over 700 million tons annually, or around 1,400 tons per minute. And plastic leakage to the environment would also rise significantly. And to hopefully help ensure that those latter numbers don't turn into reality, the replacement of conventional fossil fuel-based plastics through plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes offers a key avenue through which plastic pollution can be tackled. So for some scene setting on these materials, plastic alternatives refer to bio-based plastics that are not made with conventional fossil-based polymers, but instead the feedstock comes partially or fully from plant, animal, and microbial biomass. So that includes food crops, non-food crops, but also some waste materials, among others. And on the other side, non-plastic substitutes are non-plastic materials that also replace plastic. So these include, for example, natural fibers like bamboo and seaweed, but also mineral products like glass and aluminium. So given the many applications of plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes, I will focus on the extent to which they replace applications of single-use plastics, although please also let me highlight that the OECD work on this is still ongoing and our report is not yet ready for publication. So one important application of single-use plastics, as you surely can imagine, is packaging. And this list of plastic alternatives is not exhaustive, but you can see that overall plastic alternatives, such as PLA derived from plant sugars, are covering many packaging functions, like film. So for example, this kitchen foil that I found in my kitchen, which is 50% bio-based, but also food containers and beverage bottles. So here I brought, for example, 100% bio-PE-based bottle that at first glance looks like fossil-based plastics, but it is not. So they're getting more and more functionally and visually equivalent to single-use packaging applications. Plastic alternatives also cover many disposable food service applications of single-use plastics, such as takeaway containers, although at a slightly more niche stage than when it comes to overall packaging. And however, replacing single-use plastic alternatives is more limited in personal care and medical applications. There are some developments, for example, when it comes to products such as nappies, menstrual pads, or masks, but overall for personal care and medical applications, the use is very much still confined to specific components, such as fibers, rather than the full variety of product functions that single-use plastic covers. Then when it comes to non-plastic substitutes, similar as for plastic alternatives, packaging is the primary applications for non-plastic substitutes that replace single-use plastics. So for example, through aluminum cans and aluminum foil at the top row, but also glass bottles and jars. Non-plastic substitutes also cover many disposable food service applications of single-use plastics. And similarly as previously for plastic alternatives, for personal care and medical applications, again, there are various gaps compared to single-use plastics, but there's also emerging progress. Then in terms of trade, trade in many substitute materials remains still relatively limited compared to plastics. And also important to note is that the trade flow numbers should be interpreted with caution, as often the data doesn't distinguish between uses. So for example, at the bottom you see aluminium, but actually often aluminium is traded for construction rather than specifically for replacing plastics. So there are data gaps on the amount of these materials that are actually traded to replace plastics, and even more so to replace single-use plastics. Then the HS classifications also contain some limitations. For example, the codes are defined at material level rather than by application, meaning that they do not distinguish between single-use and reusable products, and they also don't capture production methods, whereas this is a very important consideration in terms of environmental implications of different production methods. But despite this, we can see that markets and trade of substitutes and alternatives are quickly expanding, especially over the last decade. So you can see the example of PLA on the right side. Then in terms of some examples of environmental impacts, in terms of looking at this across life cycle stages, at the first stage, in this case, the agricultural and raw material stage, you can see that there's some key environmental synergies. So compared to fossil-based plastics, plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes can offer a climate advantage at this stage due to carbon storage in their biomass-based feedstocks. There's also trade-offs though. So for example, the extraction of raw materials for minerals such as bauxite for aluminium and silica for glass can drive ecosystem degradation, for example, through soil acidification associated with mining activities. And then in the processing and manufacturing stage, here you can see vertically, if you look vertically across the stage, that the impacts are really material specific. So even just within non-plastic substitutes in this case. So some materials like bamboo at the top can be manufactured through relatively low energy processes. On the other hand, some conventional non-plastic substitutes such as aluminum and glass can be significantly more energy intensive in their processing than both fossil-based plastics, but also than other emerging substitutes. Sorry, still struggling with the clicker. Well, so in the distribution and use stage, you can see that in red, for example, glass, I've mentioned a couple of times, and the environmental impacts are quite diverse. So it's important to look across multiple stages. And vertically too, in the distribution and use stage, apologies, that's not highlighted here, you can see that the impacts are quite context specific. So for example, if glass is reused multiple times, then the climate impact per use would eventually become lower than that of single-use plastics or of plastics more generally. But the exact number of reuse required, for example, for glass bottles until there's a climate benefit compared to single-use plastic bottles depends on factors such as transport distance. And finally, in the end-of-life stage, context specificity also stands out. So some materials like PLA have a strong recyclability potential, but only under adapted waste management systems. And the extent to which such infrastructure is already rolled out really varies across regions and countries. So that means that an identical material can have very different environmental impacts depending on where its end of life occurs. So to conclude, plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes present important opportunities to reduce plastic pollution, but the environmental outcomes remain highly context-specific across life cycle stages. And then secondly, because of different synergies and trade-offs by life cycle stage, it's important to consider the full life cycle to avoid regrettable substitution, and more comparative LCA insights are needed. Finally, progress is already underway, but there are also gaps. We've discussed, for example, key data gaps in trade flows. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that there are already many important solution-oriented discussions going on, such as at the DPP. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. This is great because I think, we also have to have an honest conversation that not all plastic substitutes are equal and that they do have environmental impacts and impacts on energy use as well that we need to take into consideration. And when I look at some of the issues that you've mentioned, I'm really happy to see such a synergy with what we're doing here in the DPP, for example, on HS codes, classification of non-plastic substitutes, which I think will help give us better data and then help to ensure that we have better policies as well. So I guess my question for you is, what kind of incentives in a way do we need to invest in non-plastic substitutes which do have a climate advantage and which are low energy and which do not lead to ecosystem degradation? How do we, what can we do to better promote that?
Thank you very much for that question. So from an economics perspective, obviously a key incentive also relates to pricing and to addressing cost competitiveness. So at the moment, many plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes still remain more expensive than conventional plastics. So for example, mycelium-based materials grown from mushroom roots that are used, for example, to replace styrofoam in protective packaging have important environmental benefits, but they often carry a cost premium, at least for now. So this gap is gradually narrowing as production scales, but the cost issue still exists, so it's important to address that. And this also relates closely to what Andrea previously shared about infrastructure investment needs. So for example, many alternatives require adapted waste systems. And so without this infrastructure, even materials with strong environmental potential may not actually deliver the expected benefits in practice. So it's important to consider that environmental gains are not always automatic, but in some cases, they require action first.
Thank you. So we also need to have the proper policies at the local level to be able to promote investment in these areas as well. Yeah, thank you. I also really love that you actually bought something from your kitchen, and I can tell you it's half used, so it really is from her kitchen. So
flatmates, actually.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you. And now we're going to turn to our third speaker. I think you may know him very well because he's been here before. Mr. Borja de la Pina Escardo, Director of the Department of Global Programs at the Secretariat of the International Bamboo and Rattan Organization, INBAR, which, as you know, is a multilateral intergovernmental organization headquartered in Beijing. And of course, Borja, you oversee and manage the projects and interventions of INBAR across Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. So we very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wilson. Thank you all. I'm very happy to be here, to be back here today. As Ambassador Wilson mentioned, last year we were also here, and a delegation of the WTO also visited our secretariat in Beijing. So I'm happy to see many faces around here today also. So today, last year mainly, we came here to present the Bamboo as a Substitute for Plastic initiative, which is a global initiative that was launched by INBAR together with the government of China in 2022. But today here, we are mostly here to reply to the critical questions that Ambassador Wilson has put forward to us earlier this morning. May I have the, I'm sorry, thank you. Okay, so just briefly for those of you who don't know, INBAR, we are an intergovernmental organization founded in 1997 with 52 member states, mainly from bamboo producing countries of the global south. And our mission is basically to improve the lives of the producers and users through sustainable management and development of the entire bamboo value chain, from sustainable management, processing, production to market development and market access. So today I want to present to you an overview of the challenges that implementing this bamboo as a substitute for plastic initiative is having, how the trade-related barriers are affecting the initiative, and also what are the lessons learned and recommendations that, on our perspective, can help to boost bamboo as an alternative to plastics. So to meet, while trade-related policy serves as a binding legal instrument shaping standards and market development for non-plastic substitutes, their diversity generates regulatory fragmentation, challenges to multilateral efforts for a transition away from plastics. Now, to meet some of those challenges, regulatory, technological, and scientific, INBAR and China, as mentioned earlier, we co-launched this Bamboo as a Substitute for Plastic initiative with a 7-year action plan, seeking to identify research and development applications, innovative bamboo products, and to enhance research to validate the sustainability of bamboo products from both a carbon and competitiveness perspective. We aim to scale up the enabling frameworks for policy, for trade, for standards, and that is one of the main goals we are also here today. So as the bamboo industry is still relatively emerging, there are still significant trade barriers that affect the bamboo industry as a substitute for plastic, and those mainly fall into 4 clusters: missing international standards, regulatory misalignment, market access restriction, and supply chain constraints. So those barriers are slowing down cross-border trade, limiting certification, and preventing bamboo products from fully competing with plastics in global markets. The main solutions to overcome those trade barriers from bamboo as a substitute for plastic fall into 5 strategic areas: fixing customs classification, harmonizing tariffs, aligning standards, strengthening compliance capacity, and using trade diplomacy to secure bamboo recognition as a renewable strategic material. Bamboo currently accounts for 27% of targeted measured notifications among all the natural fibers. Measures include environmental specification, standards, and market-based support. However, only 8% of those notifications integrate tax concessions, grants, and loans to create incentives, and they are more common in developed countries, while most of the bamboo production happens in developing countries. The main missing standards that limit bamboo's viability as a plastic alternatives are those related to food contact safety, chemical additives, product performance, and customs classification. Without these, bamboo products remain more expensive to trade, harder to certify, and less trusted by global buyers. Sorry. There are many policies in place harnessing banning plastics. However, there are far fewer policies that promote substitutes or alternatives. Bamboo substitute for plastics, like bamboo plating materials, paper-based articles, dishes, plates, cups, have an average import tariff between 17 to 20%, while those imposed on plastics range from 7 to 10%. For example, the average global tariff on paper straws is 13.3%, whereas for plastic straws is only 7.7%. The WTO national governments and international cooperation mechanisms can help to reduce trade barriers for bamboo as a substitute for plastic by harmonizing standards, aligning environmental and trade rules, improving market access, and strengthening global value chain capacity. Creating a dedicated work stream on bamboo and other bio-based substitutes at the Committee on Trade and Environment to remove systemic barriers, while coordinating transparency and regulatory cooperation on bamboo standards and sustainability rules would be a crucial step forward. Also, including bamboo in plurilateral efforts like the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, which aims to eliminate trade barriers for green goods and promote eco-labeling, would be also a crucial effort from all of us. Lastly, providing aid for trade support to bamboo-producing countries to meet sustainability requirements and upgrade processing capacity is another step that could be explored. As the bamboo industry meets some trade barriers, there are also some other challenges. Based on LCA evidence, the global bamboo industry is enhancing efforts to mitigate associated environmental impacts and trade-offs of bamboo plastic alternatives. Life cycle assessments show that bamboo-based plastic alternatives generally have a lower carbon footprint than conventional plastics, but of course, as all other materials, they also have some non-trivial trade-offs, as they were mentioning earlier, especially in energy use, land impacts, chemical additives, and manufacturing emissions. Bamboo is very promising, but is not automatically impact-free. Its environmental performance depends on processing methods, energy sources, and product design. So the biggest levers to improve performance are enhancing renewable energy in processing, using bio-based adhesives to reduce PLA content and resins, and improving waste management compatibility. Lastly, also importantly, it's ensuring sustainable plantation management to make sure it doesn't compete with other food crops. Now, we have also some national initiatives that we would like to share with all of you today and some lessons learned by implementing this initiative. China's Bamboo as a Substitute for Plastic Initiative program and similar national initiatives in countries like India, Ethiopia, Ghana, and several Pacific and Caribbean states show that bamboo can successfully replace single-use plastics when governments invest in standards, processing capacity, and market incentives. Small and vulnerable economies, however, face recurring challenges: limited industrial infrastructure, high production costs, weak testing and certification systems, and fragmented supply chains. The main lesson learned is that the small vulnerable economies succeed when they start with simple, high-demand products, build regional clusters to share labs and logistics, and anchor bamboo in plastic ban policies and green procurement processes, rather than treating it as a standalone forestry projects. So in that case, sequence matters. China didn't start with exports. It firstly built domestic standards, processing capacity, and demonstration bases. It also built policy coherence. Policy coherence is very critical. Bamboo is embedded in forestry, industry, trade, and plastic reduction policies, and it shouldn't be treated as a side project. And lastly, scale is an advantage, but it's not a prerequisite. Small vulnerable economies can copy the model, but not the size. Starting with 1 or 2 product lines, like tableware or straws, and 1 or 2 regional hubs would be a very good step. Let me conclude with some recommendations on how to scale the bamboo as a substitute for plastic initiatives. Bamboo becomes a truly competitive and viable alternative to plastic when countries and industries improve product performance, cost, efficiency, standards, supply chain, and market access. The strongest recommendations focus on making bamboo cheaper, more reliable, and easier to trade, while ensuring that it meets global quality expectations. So for that, a predictable standards to reduce this risk for manufacturers and importers is very important. Cost competitiveness is the biggest barrier against cheap plastics. An inconsistent supply is a major reason that buyers may avoid sustainable alternatives. Trade barriers often make bamboo more expensive than plastics, and bamboo must match or exceed plastic performance in key uses and standards. My second part of the presentation is a little bit just about some examples of how Invar is integrated this initiative globally. Through our large-scale programs and trainings promoting industrialization of bamboo products, we have established common production and training centers. For instance, this one in Ghana, where we have trained more than 20,000 people in a wide range of areas, including plastic substitutes. Here you can see some pictures of them. Now in Kenya, we have they also introduced in 2017 ban on single-use plastics, and since then bamboo has a tremendous potential as a substitute. We have organized several workshops where we have developed bamboo plastic substitutes at a very primary processing stages. In Latin America, we have also implemented programs on advanced bamboo production and industrial processing technologies, with particular emphasis on innovation for bamboo as a substitute for plastic in construction materials. Here also you can see a regional project in 7 countries across the Caribbean, in Dominican Republic, Cuba, Panama, and Costa Rica. We have incorporated action research processes with the use of bamboo to integrate bamboo in ecotourism, construction infrastructure, to benefit rural families across these 7 countries. With that, I'd like to conclude, and I remain open for any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Borja. I mean, this is the kind of presentation where every time I think I have a question for you, your next slide answers it, you know? So, and I like that, because I like that you have the recommendations there to overcome the barriers. I also appreciate your very honest assessment of the challenges of bamboo as a substitute. I think that's really important. You did mention something which I'm really interested in when you said that many developed countries have the incentive structures in place to be able to promote more cost-effective use of bamboo as a substitute, and many developing countries do not. Does your organization, for example, have all of this information in one place, all of the incentives that developed countries offer, so that developing countries might be able to benefit and learn from what is already out there working? So in a way, scalable policies. And then my second question is, I saw your display outside, and I see the kinds of areas that you're moving into. I don't know how many of us use calculators now. Probably not many of us, if I'm honest with you. So what are your kind of key products where you really see tremendous scope for growth? Because it might not be calculators, it might not even be bags, because there are also other plastic substitutes that may be even more effective for bags, for example. So where are your what's your basket of key products that you think can really be scalable? Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Ambassador. Yes, so to answer your second question first, we are mainly focusing on 5 clusters of bamboo products to implement this initiative that are focused on packaging and food services, consumer goods, agricultural products, construction and industrial materials, and textile and personal care materials. So the reasons for why we have selected those 5 strategic areas is because those are the areas with the largest source of plastic pollution, and they are also fast for scaling. Some of those products can be cutlery, straws, molded packaging, toothbrushes, kitchenware, sealy trays, match films, similar to the ones she brought here today, biocomposites, polymer blends, wipes, dippers, and nonwovens. So most of those products, some of them are replacing petroleum-based fibers. They are also high-value, low-carbon materials, reduce microplastic in soil. That's also very important, of mulch agricultural films. and they are also products that have high global demand for plastic-free products. So that is answering your first question. Your second question regarding the trade barriers, we actually have several policy briefs in our website, in our resource repository, where we identify all these trade barriers that I have mentioned today in a single document that was published in 2024, and we can share with you if you are interested.
Thank you. But do me a favor. I would love if your organization can pull together the incentives that developed countries are using that we in developing countries can learn from. Not the barriers, but the incentive structures. And that's what I'm really interested in. So maybe that's my task for you to pull something together for us here in the DPP.
Yeah, so some of those incentives that, sorry, I forgot to mention, some are tax incentives, among other. Tax cuts can be one. Also, loans for growers and loans for small and medium-sized enterprises are also important. Not loans with high interest rates, but with lower interest rates. I have here the example of Ecuador. In Ecuador, in 2023, we, together with the government of Ecuador, we introduced a credit line by which the government of Ecuador, through its national bank, provide loans for growers and processors of bamboo products, and it's been very successful. At the beginning, it didn't have much impact because the interest rate was a bit high, but the government realized, and after 2 or 3 years, they reduced the interest rate quite significantly, and the number of applicants for that loan program has increased tremendously, and it's been very useful, particularly to scale up the national housing program with bamboo that the government has.
Thank you very much. I can see my colleague from Ecuador saying, my goodness, I hope that was WTO compatible. But no, thank you very much for that. So next, we're going to go to Mr. Rob Delink from the OECD. Rob is a senior economist at the OECD Environment Directorate, who's responsible for the work on trade and environment. He's also leading a team for modeling and outlooks, and is the principal author of the OECD Environmental Outlook, the Global Plastics Outlook, and the Regional Plastics Outlook for Southeast and East Asia. Rob, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to be here. As Manuela said, our work on plastics alternatives and substitutes is still ongoing. We don't have a lot of new insights yet. There's a lot of discussion between our governments still that needs to be held before we can publish this. But let me update you on where we stand right now. And if you ask me a question, I might answer with more personal opinions on it. Let's see if this, we seem to have some problems with the clicker today, but no. Yeah, there we are. I thought it would start simple. Basically, we need to end plastic pollution. I think we all agree on that. The ways we do that is, of course, less agreed on, but it does include promoting plastic alternatives and promoting non-plastic substitutes. We already heard a lot of speakers saying about things, how we can do this, and examples, etc., and also barriers we have come across. But what I want to talk about today here with you is talking about trade-related policies. And I split this into 3 parts. One is, how do we coordinate on domestic policies? How do we make sure that domestic policies don't counteract each other or provide barriers, other barriers to promoting plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes? Second, what do we have in terms of international policies? And then third, it's not a third category, but it's important enough to separate out, is then what's the role of standards in achieving this transition away from plastics pollution? So this is a graph. It's very hard to read, at least from a distance, but probably you're all familiar with it because this comes actually from the DPP, and this is from the inventory of trade-related plastics measures. And what I wanted to highlight is that what are these top 3 things that countries are using in terms of trade-related plastics measures. I call them measures to promote plastics alternatives and substitutes. It might be a little bit broader than that, depending on how people filled in the questionnaire, of course. But on the top is very clear, it's technical regulations and specifications. So this includes things like product and material requirements for food safety, but also more for environmental issues such as recyclability, reuse, and waste management. Now, if you look at plastics alternatives, because they're basically still plastics, a lot of them actually fall under this very same regulations. And there is very limited coverage of very specific regulations and specifications for plastics alternatives. And that makes it into a little bit of a gray zone in this respect. For conventional substitutes to plastics, there are things like aluminium and paper. There is a lot of regulations, and it's all well connected. Much less so for things like bamboo and seaweed, which we're promoting here today. So in these cases, for the traditional ones, we do have recycling, design, and labeling requirements, etc. But the question is whether those traditional substitutes will get us all the way there to end plastic pollution, also in light of the issues with life cycle assessment. And when you take a full life cycle approach to substitutes, these might not actually be the way where we want to go, and the seaweed and bamboo might be more promising. So then bans and prohibitions. I think the previous speaker very clearly indicated the attractiveness of bans and prohibitions in certain cases. These are certainly often used for single-use plastics, so for selected plastic products. It's basically, the way I see it is, it's an easy first step for governments to take. Well, what can we do if we do not understand how we can reduce industrial plastics? Well, we can at least start with cutlery, right? Sorry if that sounds a little skeptical, but it is a very important first step to look at plastics, at single-use plastics. But of course, we should not end there. We do need to look beyond single-use plastics, and beyond single-use plastics, maybe the scope of bans and prohibitions is much less there. You also have issues such as if you identify single-use plastics by thickness. This is a story that has been coming up in the DPP as well. If you identify single use by thickness, how do you then treat plastics alternatives that have a similar thickness? Is thickness the only criterion that you look at, or do you have multiple characteristics to make sure that you're only attacking the things that you don't want? And bans are more effective when we are implemented with supportive measures that promote alternatives and substitutes. I think Inbar again presented very nice examples of this. Then the third category is conformity assessment procedures. You know much more about this than I do. I'm not a trade expert, but clearly this is something that we can work with material consumption, quality control, etc. But again, it's not always easy to single out the difference between fossil-based plastics and plastics alternatives and substitutes. And also the thing that we have to keep in mind in order to make genuine progress is that we need to go beyond laboratory situations. So we do need to make sure that in real life, alternatives and substitutes do work better than fossil-based plastics. So compliance with conformity assessment procedures do need to go beyond laboratory settings and really make clear. And here, I think one of the major worries is about biodegradability, which tends to differ widely across climates. So then on to international policy instruments. We have a bunch of regional instruments. Yesterday we had a session on TESD, and that also focused a lot on regional trade agreements and similar types of progress made by like-minded countries. And one way you can see here to make progress on plastics alternatives and substitutes is to include these in lists of environmental goods or environmentally preferable products. That can get you some way there. I think our first speaker also alluded to including some of these into environmental goods list. But of course, we're all aware that discussions on environmental goods list are fraught with complications on their own. And there are many different lists out there, and that's also can be another source for fragmentation. And And finally, and also here, I think getting it into an environmental goods list, I mean, the previous speaker also said it. If you have lower tariffs on fossil-based plastics, then, and if you have high non-tariff measures on plastics alternative and substitutes, then basically you can get these onto a green goods list or an environmental goods list. But that's, of course, not sufficient. You still need to get the incentives right to make sure that the substitution actually happens. Then on international initiatives, we think that the WTO can provide enabling conditions for substitution towards plastics alternative and substitutes. The DPP is a crucial source for international coordination. The amount of information gathered by the DPP is impressive. And I think half of our report so far is basically just summarizing what the DPP has done as the basis for us to then further come up with recommendations to go beyond. DPP has been quite successful in that sense. But of course, international efforts to improve coordination and interoperability of fragmented systems remains essential. And here is where I do see some worries that even though the DPP is not a negotiating context, it's still within the borders of the WTO, and that comes with its own set of complications, I think. At least that's my personal opinion. And therefore, we do need to make sure that we have that we improve coordination and interoperability elsewhere as well. So then on to standards. And for standards, basically, we can divide this in 3 groups. We have the international standards, the ISO, the ASTM International, and these drive the progress, right, mostly. They're widely used by private sector, they're adapted into national frameworks, etc. But the plastic standards do have a lot of emphasis on the kind of late in the life cycle approach. It's about recyclability and end of life. I see much less on design, and basically missing is our discussions on measures to curb demand. There's also regional aspects. The EU has its committee for standardization. It links quite closely to the ISO, and there are of course others out there as well, although the European one is probably the most important one internationally. And then you have national standard bodies. These tend to follow what happens at the larger level, but there is room at the national level to fill gaps. And if there is an international absence, if there's disagreement internationally on standards or stuff like that, you can actually have national standards bodies fill those gaps. And that's important to keep that option open. So there's a bunch of gaps, of course, in these standards. And now here's where I get to the place where I have some preliminary insights, but I think our final report would hopefully go well beyond this and come up with much more concrete recommendations. I don't have those recommendations yet, but ISO, ASTM, and CEN standards are largely aligned, not always, but largely. But they're not always interoperable or interchangeable, and that leads to some fragmentation. And of course, you can have 2 views here. One is we need to make them as interoperable as possible. At the same time, we should not dictate one standard that then dominates the world, which would lead to no further evolution of standards in the future. Standards need to be living things, and as an economist, I would say some competition for standard setting is a healthy process to make progress also on standard setting. At the same time, interoperability across standards is vital to reduce trade costs. So fragmentation exists, and there's a lack of mutual recognition, and we need to address that, and we need to make progress on that. There is a scarcity of standards designed specifically for plastics alternatives. There's more on substitutes, but alternatives, I think, is a low-hanging fruit where you could have further developments. And as my colleague Manuela already mentioned, full life cycle assessments are basically not there yet. So do we really know what is genuine progress when we use plastics alternatives, or is there a possibility for regrettable substitution? And here I think of biodegradability, for example. There's a risk that certain alternatives may look more promising in laboratory settings, but in real life might not actually be genuine progress. Non-plastic substitutes, we do have some standards for conventional substitutes, but not a lot of product-specific standards for plastic substitutes. And we do think that there is progress in this field, but we do need further progress in this as well. And again, life cycle assessment is a core part. Now, having said that, yes, we need better data, and we need to understand where we can have genuine progress, where there is a risk of greenwashing, etc., or regrettable substitution. But at the same time, the plastics problem is so large that we do need action now. Let the lack of comprehensive data not be an excuse for policy action across the life cycle. We do need to curb demand, we do need eco-design, we do need recyclability, and we do need end-of-life waste management on all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. That was great, especially that last slide that you still have up on the screen, number 6. But you know, if a small business came to you and said, tell me what is the difference between a plastic alternative and a non-plastic substitute in real world terms, what would that be? So that's my first question. And you know, you talked about efforts to curb demand. And of course, I mean, you can ban completely, you can look at the cost structure, you can do education of your producers, consumers, citizens. But what else can countries do when you're talking about curbing demand? And then my final question, you talked about the need to, in a way, turbocharge general progress on this area. What are, in your estimation, the top 3 actions that policymakers can do in the next 2 years to have this turbocharge? Thanks.
Excellent questions, and I'm not sure I have all the answers to that. So differences between plastics alternatives and substitutes, I'm not even sure we need to care about that. I think what we know is fossil-based plastics have significant environmental problems, and we need to end the associated plastic pollution. And whether we do that through changing the way we make plastics and reducing the environmental burden of what we then still call plastics, but maybe plastics alternatives, whether we do that in that way or whether we actually substitute away from plastics is perhaps less relevant. We need both. We need to really make sure that we're ending plastics pollution, and that's such a huge challenge that we do need to make progress on all fronts. And I don't think we necessarily need very strict rules on the differentiation between those elements. For demand measures, yeah, we wrote a few reports on the various ways which countries can make progress. Obviously, this links directly to the INC negotiations, and I'm quite aware that there's no consensus across our members of the OECD on what the best approach is for curbing demand. There is a bunch of things that people can do. As an economist, I always say the first thing is getting incentives right, so that the small business that needs to make a decision actually makes a decision on the basis of the social effects of their private decision rather than only private cost perspectives. So we do need to get prices right. We do need to look again at tariffs, and we do need to look again at non-tariff measures. Non-tariff measures are often there for very good reasons, for environmental purposes. If they're there for a good reason, they should be there. But sometimes non-tariff measures are there that hamper genuine progress, and we need to very carefully look at those and try to reduce this as much as possible. Our colleagues in the Trade Directorate are looking into non-tariff measures and trying to measure non-tariff measures as well. And then finally, top actions to turbocharge genuine progress. I think for governments, as a community, I see a big risk at the moment, and that is that everybody's so interested in trying to find alternatives and substitutes and trying to find ways to do better on plastics, and it's such a hot topic that there's also a big risk for greenwashing. There's a big risk for doing things or labeling things as, oh, I recently bought chewing gum that says this is plastics free. And I was like, did my chewing gum before have plastics? I don't think so. It was a great chewing gum, by the way, but it was about the packaging. It was not about the chewing gum at all. Easy to do, but they put that larger than actually the name of the chewing gum or what's the flavor or anything. It just had big letters. I bought socks that said "end plastic waste." I have no idea what the socks were made of, but it said "end plastic waste" in big letters on it. Greenwashing is an issue. Regrettable substitution is another one, and that's, I mean, both of are extremely complicated to really avoid. But for regrettable substitution, I do think we want to make progress on life cycle assessment of alternatives and substitutes, and we think that is an essential track to go beyond. And I think I'm running out of time for my answer, but just mention again fragmentation of standards. We need to make progress there.
Thank you so much, Rob. I mean, chewing gum is the second most littered item on the planet, actually. And cigarette butts are the first most littered item on the planet, both bad habits. So now we're going to go very briefly, because we're having some problems getting him online. We have Mr. Andrea Valentris from the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. And Mr. Valentris is the project manager for the Pacific Ocean Litter Project, which is a $16 million flagship investment of the Australian government to address the pollution caused by single-use plastics in Pacific small island developing states. Andrea, we're really happy that you're able to come online. The floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present at the dialogue, and apologies for the troubles of trying to get online. Let me just start by talking about the Pacific Ocean Litter Project, and to say that in the Pacific we have regional frameworks that have been endorsed by Pacific Island leaders, and the strategic plan of SPREP, so that these are the planning documents we use to address issues such as climate change, biodiversity, and waste. And the reduction of waste and pollution is something that's dealt with in the Cleaner Pacific strategy and the Pacific Regional Action Plan. And this project, funded by Australia, seeks to refuse, reduce, replace single-use plastics. So why is this relevant to, I think, one of the thematic areas of this conference, which is promoting cooperation and trade to reduce, to end plastic pollution? Well, we have foundational studies where we're looking at substitutes to single-use plastics, compendium, and this is what countries can look at if they want substitutes and where the suppliers are around the world. Yes, that second slide there looks at the regulatory framework. So that tells you which countries in the Pacific have a policy plan roadmap to address single-use plastics. Then those ones in blue look at the item that's being banned and which countries ban them. And then the economic instruments such as container deposit schemes and levies on plastic bags, which countries have those. And then recycling. You can see nearly everyone's into recycling, but it's not as simple as it looks, because it's very hard to find a market to send the recycled plastic PET bottles to. The next slide just focuses on the fact that a lot of the plastic pollution in the Pacific, like 98.7%, comes from outside sources. And it's very, very important that we have a very robust global agreement to end plastic pollution. And as you can see, given that a lot of this pollution is dumped into the ocean and it circulates around our EEZs, the trade that we might look at once a global agreement is concluded would be looking at cooperation to remove duties on equipment testing, monitoring, sampling, to reduce plastic pollution in the oceans. The next slide, I just wanted to take you to the national context, and those are sort of real photos from countries around the Pacific. On the left bottom, that's the actual waste dump in Tuvalu, where it's an open waste dump, and you can see that once the wind blows, it all just blows into the sea. So it is a real problem, plastic pollution in many Pacific countries. So in terms of what is being done to address this issue, in terms of trade-related plastic pollution measures, we have the Waigani Convention, which is a mirror of the Basel Convention. Before we go to that slide, please, can you just go one back, please? Oh, yeah, no, we're on the right one. And this is to ban the trade in hazardous plastic waste, Article 5. A lot of countries, as I showed you in the table with the countries and the bans on single-use plastic regulations, have bans on items which are very consistent with the bans that we see WTO members have for single-use plastics, which is discussed in technical paper E. What we're trying to do under the project is to flip the tariffs on plastics and plastic substitutes, and also to promote substitutes. In fact, the bans that we promote in countries only work if there are substitutes for the ban. So, for example, at the moment, very hard to sort of substitute a plastic bottle because it's too expensive with the alternative, the aluminium bottle. But if it's a plastic straw, very easy to substitute with a paper straw and flip the tariff on that. The next slide, please. This is another important way that you can promote cooperation and trade, and that's to have standards. And we're very advanced in the work in this area, where we have accreditation, certification, tourism standards for hotels and resorts, restaurants, airlines. So if you fly Fiji Airways, you fly Solomon Airways, you'll see that when they serve you food in the paper boxes with the bamboo cutlery. And this is work we're trying to sort of promote across the Pacific, to promote sustainable tourism and promote a clean and healthy environment which attracts tourists, etc. And so I thought I'd leave it there. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Really happy that you were able to come online, because I think this was really important for us to see, first of all, that really quite shocking photograph of the situation in Tuvalu, and also that you're showcasing policy in action in small island developing states, which also goes to show that small island developing states can have a lot of agency if they enact some of these policies, even difficult ones like bans. But colleagues, we have about 10 minutes left, and I really want to open the floor for colleagues in the room and online to ask any questions or any comments for our colleagues. I see our gentleman there, and then we'll go to Alan from the US. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. First, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the coordinators, DPP coordinators, for organizing such an informative event. My question, I would like to ask a question from the International Bamboo and Rattan Organization. Sir, as we see that for many developing countries, bamboo-based products offer both the environmental benefits and the opportunities in terms of employment in international green value chains. What do you think are the barriers that these bamboo-based products and other alternatives are not being scaled up internationally first? And what pathways would you recommend that the developing countries are not only the consumers of such products, but also the producers and exporters? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alan, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning, colleagues. Alan Treat from the U.S. mission to the WTO. Three comments. The first comment, well, first of all, thank you to all the speakers. It's great that we're so lucky to be able to have such experts in the room. So we really appreciate that. My first comment is to thank, I think, both Manuela and Borja for raising this issue of cost competitiveness. My comment is I feel like the DDP, this is an issue that this group hasn't really discussed in much detail in discussions here at the WTO. And it's really important, and it impacts the alternatives and the substitutes. And my question is how should the DDP, in your opinion, how should the DDP address some of these topics related to cost competitiveness, related to some of the interlinkages of the scalability factors that our colleague from the CSIRO had mentioned in her presentation? That's my first question. My second comment relates to what Ambassador Wilson had mentioned about learning from developing countries or learning from developed countries. And my comment is these aren't just these monolithic groups. It's not just developed countries and developing countries. We had a great example of the work that Ecuador has done. And so I think there's a lot of scope to have some information sharing and experience sharing amongst members, developing countries, and both. So that's my second comment. And then my third comment to you, Rob, is this this terminology interoperability. I feel like you mentioned interoperability across standards is vital to reduce costs. And my comment is I feel that this term interoperability gets thrown around here a lot at the WTO without a clear understanding of what that term means. And so I think there's just a little bit of danger in throwing around these terms without that understanding. Interoperability of trade-related climate measures, which gets talked a lot about here, can mean different things to different delegations. And so, interoperability within the context of plastic measures might refer to mutual recognition or equivalence to some delegations and maybe something different to other delegations. So the comment is just it'd be useful, I think, here to be a little bit more specific about what those terms mean and how they could potentially apply to discussions here within the DPP. Thank you once again.
Thank you. We're going to take the lady here and then the gentleman here, and then we have time for one more question there. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for some really good presentations. The first thing I was going to ask was how will fragmentation and differences in carbon pricing affect the trade patterns for plastic and plastic waste? I think we're talking a lot about fragmentation, but it is, as the previous question that was asked about the fragmentation and in environmental incentives, and this is one that is affecting the trade patterns more related to carbon pricing that I haven't heard been mentioned specifically. And my second question is, how can carbon pricing help curb demand? Thank you.
Please, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Ambassador. I'll be very honest and genuine. First of all, thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for the excellent presentation that shows both sides, the advantages and trade-offs. But I want to also be very honest. I think the discussion here shouldn't be about the plastic product itself. It should be about ending the pollution, regardless of the source, whether it's single-use or multi-use. It's all pollution. So we need to think holistically rather than thinking on one single sector that will not really solve the root cause of the problem. In a World Bank report, an analysis report, it shows that banning single use does not represent more than 2%. So does 2% banning 2% will solve the plastic pollution? I doubt. The issue at hand is way much bigger than just talking about banning certain kind of products. Let go the discussion now that already has been explained thoroughly on the disadvantages of moving or rushing towards alternatives without being careful about the full LCA analysis between alternatives and plastic itself. In a McKinsey analysis report, it shows a comparison between 16 plastic products. Most of them are flattery. It shows that plastic is superseding all of them almost. So the point now is that the narrative should be focused on the strength that we have, not fighting the plastic product for the sake of fighting it. We have a strength in the plastic. It's durable, versatile, it's cost effective. So we need to also to cover the downside of it, the disadvantage of it, which is the pollution. Plastic by itself, it's not inherently a problem. It is the waste. The waste would generate the pollution. And system create pollution when waste system fails. Currently, we are lacking really the waste systems. Worldwide, the recycling rate does not exceed 9%. This is a huge problem that we are lacking. And we are focusing on other issues that will unintentionally create more environmental consequences. And we might find ourselves in the same room after maybe 3-4 years discussing the same issue that we have created it. But we have an opportunity now to really think collectively, holistically on the root cause of the problem and focus on what really matters. Waste management could really solve the root cause of the problem, could create jobs, add economic added value to the economies, and really make those discussions sustainable development discussions. And also one final note, I think also there is an elephant in the room. What makes the plastic pollution a problem is the accumulated waste, because there is no proper collection system, there is no proper sorting system, there is no proper recycling systems. And also the illegal legacy plastic waste. This is an accumulated waste for years and years and years. So I'll end with a question on legacy plastic waste. We saw the pictures and it's really pity. How can developing countries use those plastic waste through trade measures to make it more of an opportunity rather than a challenge? Could be maybe through, for example, re-exporting it to a country of origins where they have more capacity to recycle it and use it as a feedstock, and could be also return it back to the same countries to use it in new applications. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We should get you on the next panel because I like having different perspectives, but I very much agree we need to address this in a holistic manner, which means addressing everything you just said, but also addressing this as well. But let me turn to the lady there for the final question and comment.
Thank you, Ambassador, panelists, and colleagues for this very interesting and enriching discussion. I'm representing the Indonesian mission here from in Geneva. I have 2 questions, so I'll try to be very quick due to the limited time. So the first one, it's for Inbar. So could you also share a bit of information on Inbar's work on rattan, aside from bamboo, including its advantages or disadvantages as a substitute material for single-use plastics? And the second one, I can address this question to Inbar and also other panelists. So some of the panelists mentioned about the importance of harmonizing standards and aligning environmental and trade rules for bamboo-based plastic substitutes or other material as plastic substitutes. So from the perspective of developing members, fragmented standards and certification requirements can create high compliance costs. So how can WTO members and organizations, such as the ones that has participated in this panel, can work together to promote greater transparency, mutual recognition, and capacity building? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me start with Rob. Respond to whatever you wish to respond to.
Well, I wish to respond to everything and have lengthy discussions with all of you, but it would take too much time. Specifically, I want to thank the USA for the comment on interoperability and the need to be more specific. I don't have an answer today, But this is excellent guidance for us for when we write our reports to make sure that we have that level of granularity and specificity in our reports so that we actually make a contribution that helps. And that we're not stuck in jargon and not stuck in I'm also very explicitly not going to answer the question on carbon prices. Our member countries will not agree on what the right answer to that one is, so I'm not going to focus on that. And then on the question of we should end pollution, fully agreed. And plastics is not inherently the problem. There are, of course, also environmental impacts associated with plastics production that we do need to take into an holistic account. So plastics is not problem-free in that sense. Plastic production is. We did a report in 2024 where we show that it is actually much cheaper for countries to have a life cycle approach and combine waste management with upstream measures as well than to just look at waste management systems. So yes, waste management systems are essential, and I think OECD countries largely show that we can avoid most plastic pollution if you have well-developed waste management systems. But it's not enough, especially not enough given all the trends in the increases in plastics production and use that we foresee for the coming decades.
Thank you. I'm getting Secretariat panic, so we need to wrap up. 1 minute. Porta.
Sorry, I will very quickly just reply the question from the delegate of Pakistan, who was asking about what are the main trade barriers. So I think I've presented a little bit earlier about it, but I will expand a little bit. Firstly, there are unfair trade classification that treats bamboo as a timber instead of a green agricultural grass. And that, of course, leads to higher import duties than plastic, and also it weakens its price competitiveness. Secondly, there are also fragmented non-tariff trade barriers, including inconsistent certification, safety, and sustainability standards that increases compliance costs, and especially for small producers in developing nations. And lastly, developing nations, as I mentioned earlier, they face also weak industrial capacity, low tech processing, and limited global recognition, making it large scale and highly value exports very difficult. However, these issues, trade can play a vital role because it can revise the tariff rules to grant preferential rates for green products like bamboo and eliminate the unfair price gap with plastics. Secondly, we can also harmonize the global standards and adopt mutual certification recognition to reduce the trade costs. That could be also a very important measure. And targeted trade facilitation, technical assistance, and favorable origin rules can help developing countries to upgrade their industrial chains. Ultimately, these policies will enable developing nations to move merely from plastic alternatives to formal producers and exporters, as you were mentioning. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I have to. Andrea from Pintos, 30 seconds. Anything from you?
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to address one point around the need to fight plastic waste. And so I think we are in agreement about the importance of standards, incentives, the need for robust technical solutions. But from my experience working across Southeast Asia, one point that I think is important to also surface here, which sometimes could be overlooked, is the role of informal workers when it comes to collection, recovery, and the role they play in terms of waste management. They mainly remain invisible in policy and trade systems. And also another aspect is also the considerations around behavioral change, the behavioral aspect as well of how consumers relate to plastic, and that plastic then ends up in the environment. And so I think alongside the technical solutions, policy needs to integrate the informal workers and account for those behavioral factors as well if we want trade systems to scale effectively. And that has the opportunity to create more jobs, but capacity building and those considerations are important if we want to make sure that we align with SDGs and we leave no one behind.
Thank you, Andrea. Now you have 20 seconds, Andrea Valentras.
Thanks, Chair. Now, I just wanted to pick up on the issue with legacy waste. I think in the Pacific, legacy waste does exist, but we would like to see existing waste addressed as well, because the problem is recurring and it's expanding, proliferating. So you can go to a very northern beach of Palau, for example, which is uninhabited, and walk around there and pick up all these plastic bottles, which are existing waste, and that has to be addressed. With concessions and duty arrangements for equipment to clean all that up. That's my 20 seconds. Thank you, Chair.
Manuela, 5 seconds.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. So on the cost aspect, in some cases, I think there's this issue that costs for plastic alternatives and non-plastic substitutes remain high because scale is limited. But at the same time, scale can't really expand without stronger demand. So it's about how to get out of this loop. And this touches on, we need clearer environmental evidence, such as RACL findings, to try to stimulate demand, but also this evidence needs to be reinforced through policy measures and signals such as standards and labelings, as you all have touched on already. Thank you.
My 1 second is thank you and an applause for this wonderful panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues online. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so we are not able to
Good morning, colleagues
switch on the
from
video,
India.
but I hope we are audible.
Could you turn your camera on as well as
Yeah.
your mic on so we can test your connection?
Yeah, it's showing an error that you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. I hope, yeah, I hope we all are visible now. Reading तो वापस सेटिंग चेंज होगी और उसको ऊपर भी करना है हाँ थोड़ा नीचे कर
थोड़ा सा इधर आ जाएगा
Good afternoon, colleagues from India.
Good afternoon. Are we audible now?
Yes, this is better.
This is better.
I
Okay.
will check with the interpreters. Could you say a few words, please?
Very good afternoon. Are we clearly audible from your side?
Many thanks. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Colleagues from India, would you like to test the connect your slides, the slideshow?
Yes, we are just sharing.
They have to stop sharing first.
I believe the screen is being shared from your side. It may be
Still,
better if you can.
can share. You can share it. Mine will disappear
Okay.
when you start sharing.
All right. All right.
ये वाला पहले ये
I've stopped sharing on my side.
Now, is our presentation visible from you?
Yes, it is. Can you put it full screen? Yes. Okay. Very good. All
All
good,
right.
I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
move करके
Let us just check it while the slideshows are moving or not. Just give us a few seconds. So, can your side see the slide movements?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
So we start the meeting now.
Good morning, colleagues. I can see why the delegates volunteer to become chairs because using the gavel is a nice experience. So I'll do it one more time. Please, if you can settle down and we can then start this last session for the Trade and Environment Week. So good morning and good afternoon to those who are joining us here in the in room D and also across various time zones online on YouTube. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to all of you who have gathered here for our session, which is titled Showcase of India's carbon credit trading scheme and standardization in renewable energy. Our expert speakers today are all joining from Delhi online on Zoom. So today is the World Environment Day. 54 years ago today in Stockholm, the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment was convened, and which led to the birth of the United Nations Environment Programme, and also the day of 5th June being designated as the World Environment Day. One of the principles which was enshrined in the Stockholm conference, it said the environmental policies of all states should enhance and not adversely affect the present or future development potential of developing countries, nor should they hamper the attainment of better living conditions for all. So in that spirit, today's event focuses on initiatives taken by India in relation to its nationally determined contributions to play its part in addressing the three aspects of sustainable development, which we discuss very often in the WTO, which is the social, economic, and environmental. So we have a lineup of 4 speakers today, and they will be covering different aspects of these national priorities and objectives, covering 3 segments. In the first segment, Ambassador Anita Nandini, our Deputy Permanent Representative to the WTO, will make opening remarks on India's approach to trade and climate issues. In the second segment, we will cover information on India's carbon credit trading system. The segment has 2 speakers, Mr. Abhishek Acharya from India's Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and Mr. Arijit Sen Gupta from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency under the Ministry of Power. In the third segment, we will showcase India's approach to developing standards in the renewable energy space, especially in the green hydrogen space, which is a new technology and quite vital for energy transition in the years to come. So India has taken an early view of creating some standardization in that space. And this kind of feeds into the conversations which we have had all this week on interoperability and essentially on having better predictability of these measures. So this will be covered by Mr. Prasad Chafekar from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Following all the presentations, I will open the floor for questions and comments here in room D. We will then have closing remarks from each of the speakers. And so with that background, let me invite our DPR, Ambassador Anita Nandini. Please, you have the floor.
Just needed to have the breakfast today. Thanks. So, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you, and I wish you a very happy Environment Day. Thank you for joining us today for this special showcase organized by India. We gather at a time when the intersection of trade and environment leading to negative impact on market access for developing countries is dominating the discourse here in Geneva. However, for developing and developed nations alike, the central challenge of our era is clear. How do we achieve rapid, sustainable economic growth while aggressively decarbonizing our economies? For India, this is not a theoretical debate. In fact, our Prime Minister today has called for furthering sustainable growth while reaffirming our commitment to protecting the environment on this Environment Day. We are home to 1/6 of the humanity. Our sustainable development journey seeks to balance the 3 dimensions: social, economic, and environmental. I'm proud to say that India has not only met the consistently outpaced its nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. We see climate action not as a burden, but as an opportunity to build a resilient, future-ready economy. However, a truly successful green transition requires clear rules, measurable baselines, and robust regulatory frameworks. Without them, market fragmentation and fragmented standards risk creating new, unintended barriers to international trade. Today, we are here to showcase our two pioneering domestic initiatives that establish these precise baselines, blending state-led vision with market efficiency. We have fantastic expert speakers from our capital for that. Well, I can include myself too, if that's okay. So please make good use of this forum and raise your comments and doubts to them. First, you will hear about the development of our carbon credit trading scheme. India is building a robust, unified national framework for our domestic carbon market, backed by a secure electronic registry platform. By putting a clear price on additional actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, this market-based mechanism gives our industries a transparent, predictable pathway to decarbonize. It incentivizes innovation while ensuring economic growth remains uncompromised. Second, we will look at India's breakthroughs in standardization for renewable energy, with a special focus on our national green hydrogen mission. Green hydrogen is a cornerstone of India's strategy to clean up hard-to-abate sectors. But for a global market to trust green commodities, we need scientifically sound definitions. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of Government of India has done exactly that, outlining strict emission thresholds that must be met for hydrogen to be certified as truly green. Why are we sharing this at the WTO? Because domestic regulatory clarity is a bedrock of international trade cooperation. By establishing transparent, verifiable, and non-discriminatory standards at home, India is preparing its economy to align seamlessly with the future of global green trade. We believe that environmental objectives must be pursued through trade facilitating collaborative mechanisms rather than unilateral, punitive trade measures. We have a stellar lineup of experts, as I said earlier. They will take you through the mechanics of the carbon market and the technicalities of our renewable energy standards. I encourage you to engage actively. Please share your perspectives and explore how these frameworks can serve as a template for balanced, pro-development green policies globally. Once again, thank you for your presence and looking forward to an enriching discussion. Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you so much for your remarks and setting the important context for the event today. Let us now turn to the discussion on India's carbon credit trading system, which is the first subject we cover. A robust national framework for Indian carbon market through a reliable national carbon credit electronic platform is being developed. This framework aims to complement and support various entities by pricing their additional actions towards greenhouse gas emission reduction who are undertaking projects to decarbonize the Indian economy. To unpack this recent development, let me first invite Mr. Abhishek Acharya from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to make his presentation on the larger context of India's approach to environment and climate change issues. Abhishek, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very
Abhishek,
much.
we
I hope
can't
the
hear you.
screen. Thank you very much. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, all good.
All right. Thank you. And to everyone, good afternoon from India. And since we are in Geneva, be it virtually or in person, so bonjour and guten tag to everyone. I am Abhishek Acharya from Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. I am starting with a presentation that would give you a broad framework, the sustainable initiatives that the government of India is taking. Next slide, please. So my presentation is placed in 6 primary pillars, which showcase the India's climate commitments, a little bit of delving in the carbon markets and greening initiatives, the key environmental initiatives that we have taken in our ministry, the change-related specific initiatives, which are given in 2 segments, and the basic principles and way forward that we have been taking through our CBDR-based national circumstances-based initiatives. Next slide, please. So, as our DPR also has mentioned, India has been taking very strong strides in our NDCs, in our commitments, and we have been fulfilling more than our targets even more before the timelines. So, as we can see, we have already taken 53% of non-fossil fuel installed power capacity as of March 2026. The target was 50% by 2030. We have met it 5 years early. We have reduced our emission intensity by 37.38%, which was targeted by up to 35% by 2030, as again met 10 years early. And we have created a 2.4 billion tons of CO2 equivalent carbon sink, which was targeted up to 3 billion CO2 equivalent carbon sink by 2030. So we have placed our new nationally determined contribution this year, which targets to reduce the GDP emission intensity by 47% below the 2005 levels by 2035. We aim to achieve 60% of cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based energy. We are targeting to create a carbon sink of 3.5 to 4 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through forestry and tree cover. And we have the overall guiding vision of the Viksit Bharat, that the developed India through sustainable climate resilient development anchored in environment and economy. Next slide, please. So a little bit on the carbon market initiatives and the green initiatives, which aligns with our long-term low emission development strategy, how our domestic and international market mechanisms contribute to this particular development strategy. We have the carbon credit trading system recently developed. India's national compliance carbon market covers emission intensive sectors. We have our green credit program, which is a voluntary mechanism in incentivizing the positive environmental actions through tradable credits. We have been following the Article 6 and the International Carbon Cooperation. We are engaging in the cooperative approaches under the 6.2, which is a voluntary carbon market with Japan and South Korea. And we are also participating in the PACM under Article 6.4. So the key consideration when we see in the multilateral dialogue is scaled, accessible climate finance and technology transfer, which is critical enabler for developing nations to operationalize our long-term low-emission development strategy, and the adequacy and accessibility of these flows to remain, which remains a concern. Next slide, please. So some of the key environment-related initiatives that we have been taking in our ministry under the Government of India are the National Action Plan on Climate, which began back in 2008 with 9 national missions, both in mitigation and adaptation. We have our Mission Life, which is the Lifestyle for Environment, launched in COP26 in 2021 by Honorable Prime Minister. Over 6 crore participants in 36 plus lakh events we have participated to take core pledge of having a lifestyle for environment. And the very recently taken initiative on the tree planting through Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam, which means plant a tree on the name of your mother. We have taken a global climate leadership through our International Solar Alliance, and which was launched back in 2019. And we have $10 trillion in climate resilient infrastructure targeted by 2050. We are also engaging in Global Biofuel Alliance, which is launched by Honorable Prime Minister in G20 New Delhi Summit in September 2023, with 33 countries and 14 international organizations as members. We have the Mangrove Initiatives launched in 2024, which is called Mishti. In our language, it means sweet. So it's sort of a sweet gesture to create and preserve our mangroves, which will ultimately in our carbon sink objectives. Next slide, please. Now, specifically going to the climate change initiatives, we have one of the primary targets right now is the National Adaptation Plan, which is under development. We have a specific national adaptation fund on climate change established back in 2015, which is dedicated towards the climate action on the adaptation and to prioritize the needs identified in the state action plans. Of course, the state action plans, we have a quasi-federal structure, which all the 34 states in India and the union territories have prepared the state action plan on climate change. We have the national mission for sustaining the Himalayan ecosystem, which is one of the biggest and most important ecosystem, not only for India, for all entire South Asia and for Asia. So the problem that we are facing is the developing countries like India are facing the disproportionate climate vulnerability despite our low historical emissions. And for that, let's go to the next slide to enunciate much further. This is a very important aspect that we have been emphasizing for a long time over the negotiations, as well as engaging with the international climate discourse. The means of implementation and the common but differentiated responsibilities and the respective capacities. The CBDRRC having the foundational principle along with equity in the UNFCCC process. And obviously developing economies navigate a complex set of concurrent priorities for which our differentiated responsibilities needs to be taken into account and needs to be supplemented with the climate finance pledges that the international climate community has taken under the UNFCCC as well as the Paris Agreement. The new collective quantified goals that we know emanating out of the Article 9.3 of the Paris Agreement coming out in COP29 should be delivered primarily through the grants and low-cost financing, adhering to the principles and provisions of UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. We need the technology transfer engagements and commitments to be fulfilled, and also the capacity development under the Paris Agreement to be adhered to and recognized. Next slide, please. What we feel for the principles for an equitable trade and climate framework, we need to anchor our frameworks in multilateral agreements like the UNFCCC, which the only place in the UNFCCC is Article 3.5, which mentions about climate and trade. The commitments under the Paris Agreements and including the NDC process and transparency framework needs to be adhered to. And as we see that new trade and climate linkages are coming up, they should reinforce rather than duplicate or reinterpret multilateral commitments. As we have mentioned, equity and differentiated responsibilities and rule-based cooperative approaches are most important from our side. So we have been emphasizing on these issues for a long time. Next slide, please. So this is what the broad aspect that we wanted to present to you on the environmental aspect. I now cede the chair to my colleague, Dr. Arijit Sengupta, Director from Bureau of Energy Efficiency.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for your valuable insights and the broad scene-setting view. This ties in well with what our next speaker, Mr. Arijit Sengupta, will be speaking about, who will be going into the details of this carbon credit trading system. May I now invite Arijit to make his remarks. Arijit, you have the floor. Thank you.
So my colleague from the Ministry of Environment has already spoken about the background as to why we are why we have gone for this carbon credit trading scheme. So I will straight away jump into the contours of the scheme. So next slide, please. Next slide. So about the India's...
Arijit, sorry, can we just make the presentation in the presentation mode? Currently, it's just the slide mode. If you can just put it in presentation. Thank you.
Is it better now? Is it in the presentation mode?
We are still waiting for the slides to come up.
Sure.
Yeah, all good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as my colleague has already mentioned about the background why we have initiated the carbon credit trading scheme. So we can next jump to the next slide, please. So if we look at the India's carbon credit trading scheme, and so before I speak out the evolution of the scheme, it is pertinent to note that if we talk about the other emission trading scheme which are there globally, so they use mostly a cap and trade mechanism, wherein in case of carbon credit trading scheme, we are using a baseline and credit mechanism. So the targets are set per unit of production rather than capping the overall output. That is essentially the essence of our scheme. And secondly, if we look at the other emissions trading schemes, they issue a finite number of permits or allowances, which are given like before the compliance period. And in case of the Indian carbon credit trading scheme, we are issuing carbon credit certificates after the compliance period, and only if the unit or the facility they overachieve their designated targets. So if you can see it in this slide, so we started in January 2023 when the law was passed in the parliament, wherein provision for CCTS was made. And now we are only in the mid of 26, that is hardly 3 years. So we have already prepared the compliance mechanism and the offset mechanism under the scheme. And also we have notified the targets under the compliance mechanism. Next slide, please. And if we look at the institutional framework, then we have a national steering committee, which is again headed by the Environment Ministry and the Power Ministry from the Government of India side. And we have the registry as the Grid Controller of India, with the administrator, Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So just to mention that all the institutional framework has been put into place in a very short time frame. Next slide, please. So both the mechanisms, that is the compliance and the offset mechanisms, are now very much in place and are running. So if you look at the compliance mechanism, it is mandatory and it gives like target to reduce the greenhouse gas emission intensity to the obligated entities, and the targets are given on a facility level. 8 sectors are covered under the compliance mechanism. If we look at the offset mechanism, it is a voluntary in nature. The boundary is a project level, and the reduction must be beyond the baseline scenario. And right now, 10 sectors are covered, which actually encompasses all the 17 sectors which are covered under the Article 6.2. So if we look at, for example, the energy, it covers energy industries, energy distribution, and energy demand as well. Similarly, the industry sector, it covers subsectors like manufacturing, chemical, mining, metals. So that way we are covering the 17 sectors which are there as per the international norms. Next slide, please. If we look into the compliance mechanism, then of course it is applicable for the hard to abate sectors. Here, the facilities which have been assigned targets are named as the obligated entities. Targets have been assigned in terms of reducing their greenhouse gas emission intensity. Mostly the scope 1 and scope 2 related are being covered, although in few cases scope 3 also comes. But broadly, it is the scope 1 and scope 2 which we are covered under the compliance mechanism. We have the rules, the laws in place, and it is an annual compliance. Currently, 490 obligated entities have been assigned targets for 7 notified sectors. Next slide, please. So just to brief you about how this trading mechanism or how the carbon credit certificates are going to be issued. So if somebody exceeds the target which have been assigned to the facility, then they will be issued carbon credits by multiplying the reduction in the GHG emission intensity with the production in the assessment year. And similarly, if somebody fails to achieve the target or there is a shortfall in the targets, then they can they are liable to kind of purchase the carbon credit certificates through a trading mechanism. And as it was mentioned also, the registry and the trading rules are also already in place. Next slide, please. So if we look at how the targets for these 7 hard to abate sectors have been arrived at. So basically, we have looked into the sectoral emission profiling and the baseline, the emission reduction potential in case of the technology diffusion, whether it is energy efficiency related technology or renewable energy related technology or fuel switching, and also the marginal abatement cost curve for each technology applicable to each sector are also kind of taken into account to arrive at the sector specific trajectory till 2030 and also the industry specific trajectory till 2030. Next slide. This slide just shows the narrative of the marginal abatement cost curve for a particular sector that was taken into account. And if you can look at the right side graph, so essentially the message that it conveys is that the lesser efficient units have been assigned more stringent targets compared to more efficient units in a particular sector. Next slide, please. So now coming to the offset mechanism. So we have prepared a detailed procedure for the offset mechanism, and it encompasses these 5 sections. So if you look at the first section, that is the registration and issuance procedure, so it talks about how the project needs to be registered, what are the steps that are to be followed for pre-registration, registration, and then subsequently issuance of carbon credits. It also details out the validation and the verification part of a particular project. Section B talks about the project standard, which gives a clear, consistent, and transparent set of design, implementation, and monitoring of the each projects. Section C talks about the validation and the verification standard, which are in line with the ISO 14064 Part 2. Section D talks about if any project has negative impact to the environment or social impact, how to mitigate or how to address those issues. And if any project has a positive impact, then also what are the contributions that those projects are going to have insofar as SDG standards are considered. The last section talks about how if some new methodology or new projects have to be included in the offset mechanism, how are we going to do that? So currently, as I mentioned earlier also, there are 10 sectors which are covered for the offset mechanism, and we have already approved 9 methodologies, and 3 more methodologies are very soon going to be in the public domain. Next slide. This is just an example of how the project cycle looks like for the project registration. How what are the steps for pre-registration and subsequent registration, pre-issuance, and issuance of the project. Next slide, please. Now, this was all about the compliance mechanism and the offset mechanism. In the next few slides, we'll be talking about the fact that we are aware that, as all of you are aware, that several members are considering coming up with carbon border adjustment mechanisms. And of course, European Union is the first one who have already implemented such a regulation from 1st of January 2026. And it covers 6 sectors, out of which the sectors which are highlighted in red, that is steel, aluminum, hydrogen, are those sectors which are likely to be adversely impacted in case of India. So that is why those are highlighted. And while the CBAM also started, but the actual payment of certificate will begin from next year onwards. Next slide, please. Again, we are just comparing the Indian CCTS with the EU CBAM as an illustration, as it is the first CBAM regulation which has been implemented. So the message that we are conveying from this slide is that the purpose, the sectoral coverage, the boundary, the emission coverage, the reporting frequency, the applicability are mostly similar. So our Indian CCTS is almost in line with best in the globally. Next slide. Similarly, if we look at the validation and the verification part of the Indian CCTS vis-a-vis the EU CBAM, again, mostly the requirements are similar. We have also kept a very stringent kind of norms, because all of us understand that validation and verification of projects are going to be the key to enable us for a successful carbon credit market. So again, if you look at it, mostly the requirements are similar, and though there are some difference in the ISO certification, but that is depend on the nature of the program. Next slide, please. So here also the message that we are trying to give is that in so far as the requirement for each of the auditors or the verifiers or the technical expert who will be carrying out this validation and verification exercise for the Indian CCTS, the designs are exactly the same as we have noticed in case of EU CBAM as well. So the message is that the Indian CCTS scheme has been designed through an evidence-based approach, and keeping in view the fact that we are trying to maintain a highest level of transparency, consistency, impartiality, and also documentation, and those are in line with the best in the world. And we hope that through the Indian CCTS, our industries and our country will be able to achieve the pathway for decarbonization. Thank you very much. Looking forward for questions, if any, at the end of the session. Thank you. And then I'll pass on to my colleague, Dr. Prasad from Ministry of New and Renewable Energy to take the floor, please.
Arijit, sorry, just one question for you, which someone has already posed. So the question was that since you said there are 490 obligated entities, are all of these already part of CCTS, or is there like a glide path when they will join the system? So if you can please comment on that. We'll take the questions later, but this one was posed right now, so I thought I'll ask you.
Yeah, so the notification for 490 industrial units, obligated entities are already there in the public domain, and they have been signed the targets. They have to achieve the targets by 26-27. That is the financial year which we follow in India. That is from April. By April 27, they need to comply with the targets. For 5 sectors out of these 7 sectors, they have to comply with the targets which were assigned to them in 25-26 as well. So all in all, for all the 7 sectors, yes, they need to comply with the targets. But for 5 of them, they also comply with the 25-26 targets as well. Hope it answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Arijit, for your contribution. Your presentation shows the thoughtful and the deep design considerations that have been accounted for in the design of our carbon credit trading system, which also reflects India's NDC commitments, as you also brought out. We will now move to the third and the last segment of this session, which is about the importance of standardization for providing clear regulatory and business visibility in an emerging technology area, which is on green hydrogen. To talk us through India's initiatives in promoting early and clear standardization in this space, I now invite Mr. Prasad Chafikar to make his presentation. Prasad, you have the floor, please.
Please share the presentation. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, Prasad, all good. We can hear you and we can see the presentation.
Okay. Please go to the next slide. So this is just a brief introduction about our mission, which we launched for green hydrogen. This was launched almost 3 years back. And the central pillar of this mission is the target of 5 million tons by the end of this decade. And the other parameters which are seen there, that is the 125 gigawatts of RE and 600,000 jobs. These are, we expect the benefits from having this capacity. This mission has multiple other components. The biggest component is the subsidy for production of hydrogen in India. We also have pilot projects to be funded. We also fund R&D, testing, certification, labs, and many other things under the mission. Next. So let's come straight to the point. We notified this standard almost 2 years back, 3 years back, sorry. The big number to be followed is that we have kept the initiative for green, the threshold for green as 2 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kg of green hydrogen. This is to be counted over a 12-month average emission. 12 months because in India there are a lot of seasons. We have the monsoon season and different types of climate and weather in different parts. So that's why we have kept a 1 year average of the emissions to be attained. We are following a well-to-gate a scope. We are currently recognizing two pathways. One is through electrolysis, and the other is through biomass-based routes. So this is what we're talking about, how we have developed the scheme to certify this product called green hydrogen. Next. As I mentioned, there are two pathways which we have mentioned. We have also clearly specified what processes are covered under each pathway. We have also kept an option open that in the future, if somebody wants to suggest any alternate way, which can also be called green, then they can also give us a submission, and based on that, we can also add more pathways as the time goes. Next, please. So the scheme which notified in last year's the month of April covers essentially these 7 points: who governs it, the system boundaries, the formulas to calculate the emission, the MRV checklist, so to speak, and the SOPs, the chain of custody, and the geo model. So how will we trace the hydrogen as it changes hands through different users? Next. So we have 4 different types of certificates. We don't have a single certificate. We have 4 different types of certificates. 2 of them are voluntary and 2 of them are compulsory. Let me go one by one. The concept certificate is when your plant is sort of design is ready. So you have an assessment of whether that specific design, in theory, is capable of producing green hydrogen. That is the emissions keeping below the 2 kilogram or boundary. But that part is not compulsory. The second certificate is for the facility. This is to be taken when the facility is already up and running, and you're just carrying out the pre-commissioning like stage that you're testing and something. In that stage, you have to obtain the certificate that now my facility, which is up and running, or almost up and running, I would say, can actually generate the hydrogen which is capable of meeting our scheme. Now, the third certificate was required. This is not compulsory. It is voluntary. But this was required because since we have a period of emission counting of 12 months, so the producers in the meantime need to sell the hydrogen as green, at least with some certification. So the producer certificate was introduced so that in the interim, till they have not got the final certificate, they can get this certificate and actually sell the hydrogen as green, with a caveat that if in the final certificate they don't meet the criteria of the 2 kilogram limit, then all certificates issued in number 3 will also be cancelled. So the producer has to take a big responsibility in ensuring that he does meet the overall 12-month bar for 2 kilograms. Next. Yeah. So so this slide just gives in more detail as to what we include in the system boundary. We have included the treatment of water, the actual process of electrolysis, obviously, and the power consumed in that process, the gas purification, drying, and compression if it is on site, and any input materials like catalysts, solvents, etc., which you may bring in the plant boundary. So all these are covered, and what specifically are not covered, since we follow the well-to-gate model, we don't cover the transport and storage part because it's outside the gate. The hydrogen standard does not consider the emissions from conversion of H2 to other carriers like ammonia. We don't consider the emissions from reconversion of hydrogen to other, say, power, for example, back to power. The actual emissions from the commissioning of the plant or the solar or the wind plant are also not considered as their capital goods. And scope 3 is also outside the scope of our standard. So these are the broadly inclusions and the exclusions. We have kept in mind that in the initial stages, industry needs to be in a condition to comply with them, and we do not want to impose constraints which are sort of unreasonable to comply to at the start. But of course, we have retained the authority to tighten the standards as the industry matures, depending upon our NDC targets and ease of compliance as well. Next. There are 5 types of bodies under the scheme. The first and most important is the producer who actually sets up the plant and applies for the certificate. Second part is the AC with the carbon verifier who actually does all the emission accounting and gives a report that yes, this is compliant or not compliant with India standard. The implementing agency is the agency responsible for maintaining the portal, presenting the data to the committee for verification and approval. The technical committee is the authority to actually issue the certificates. And finally, the ministry is overall in charge of the whole process. So these are the 5 main stakeholders under the certification scheme of India. Next. I would just briefly also tell what kind of power we consider to be allowed under RE and what is not permitted. As you have seen, so we are not calling it clean hydrogen, we are calling it green hydrogen. It means for us, the input necessarily has to be renewable in nature. It can be either power or biomass, but it has to be RE power essentially. So we do allow green tariff, meaning that if there is a distribution company who charges people to certify that the power which is given to them is green, that is allowed as green power. If you purchase green power on an exchange, in India, we have a specific exchange for green power. If you purchase from that exchange, we also allow that. And obviously, if you have an actual agreement to purchase green power, that also is allowed. What is not allowed is RECs, that is the certificates that somebody else has consumed green power and you cannot claim it as your own through RECs. That is not allowed. And we also don't allow to claim carbon credits to reduce your emissions. You have to meet the emissions as it is physically in your plant below 2 kilograms of CO2. So these are the broad provisions which pertain to RE, what is allowed and not allowed. Next. So I would just take the RFNBO because it is the most sort of widely known system. And I will just highlight the key differences we have with the RFNBO. So it is clear to all the participants since we are in Europe. As I mentioned before, the RFNBO covers well to wheel, whereas we are covering well to gate. There are some differences in the numbers. RFNBO is 3.38. India set it at 2. RFNBO, the name itself is clear. They don't allow any biological origin, and we allow them. Then there are the 3 famous criteria of rationality, then temporal correlation and geographical correlation are not present as it is in the Indian standard. I also tell why. One by one. So we allow power to be used from new plants as well as old plants. The rationale behind that is that it is very unlikely that people will use old plants because the tariffs of those plants are higher, number one. And most old plants are already locked in very long-term agreements of power. So power from those plants cannot be diverted for hydrogen purpose. So that's why we not specifically impose the constraint of additionality, because it is going to be followed in any case for most of the plants. The temporal correlation, we do have some form of it in the sense that we allow banking, but since in our country, the topic of electricity is governed both by the center and the states, and each state has its own rules, or each province for Europeans, they have their own rules for banking. So we have simply mentioned that the plants have to follow those state rules or those provincial rules for banking. But most provinces in India allow banking of only 1 month. And there are other additions to it. Some discoms allow banking only in the same period of the day. Some allow, if you put in 100 units, you can only take out 30 units. So different states follow different rules, and we don't want to set any broad rules because the provinces have a lot to do with managing their own grid, and we don't want to interfere in that process. The third big difference is we don't have the concept of the single bid area or bidding zone, is because in India we follow one nation, one grid. It means our grid is physically interconnected across, and we can inject power in any part of the country and withdraw in any part of the country with accurate 15-minute block matching. So the third condition was not required to be implemented in India because we have a very physically strong grid. Our capacity to transfer power within regions of India is roughly around 130 gigawatts, and we're building every year. So that's more than enough capacity to transmit as much power as we want. So this is the chief differences between what we chose. We have chosen the route which we think is most optimal. If we have to comply with our standard, 95% of the power used will have to be from RE sources, and the possibility of using thermal power or coal power is next to zero. It will only be used for some backup purpose, something in case there is some sudden trip in the RE plant or something. Otherwise, there is no scope for using thermal power, and frankly speaking, in thermal power is twice as expensive roughly as RE power, and so no business entity will actually want to use thermal power because the costs go up by a factor of 100%. Next, please. So we have also notified the standards for the two derivatives, green ammonia and methanol. Those are shown, the numbers are shown on the screen at 0.38 kg of CO2 and 0.44 kg of CO2 for methanol. We are currently in the process of specifying the detailed MRV procedure for both of these, but it will be largely built on the hydrogen part with specific additions to the ammonia loop or the other the other plant which is required to make the derivative. One important difference in the methanol part is that we are currently not insisting on biological CO2 to be used. However, we have kept the authority that based upon the availability we see in the country and the pricing signals which we get in the future, we may impose conditions on which CO2 can be used in these two derivatives. So that is currently allowed to use any CO2 for methanol, but in due course of time, we will take an appraisal to review and impose any conditions which we see fit to only allow specific CO2 sources for methanol. So this is a mixture of what we've kept as pragmatism. We want to keep the price as low as possible while ensuring that the power used remains substantially green to only cover small gaps through use of non-RE power. We feel that this standard which we have set sufficiently encourage industry to go green, as well as not make it so hard that the users of hydrogen are deterred by the excessive price which very strict conditions bring along with it. We believe this is a fair match between what to achieve lowest emissions and to achieve lowest. As always, with any country, we are committed to revisiting these norms periodically to make sure that we are in alignment with the world. Also, one more point which I wanted to mention, and with that I'll end my talk. In the scheme which is there on our website, we have taken or borrowed heavily from the ISO standard for GHG measurement. I think it's 19870. And we have tried to keep it as close as possible to that standard. So we want to align closely with international benchmarks to the extent it makes sense for our industry. Next. Yeah, thank you. Any questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasad, for that intervention and the presentation. So as we noticed, both these areas that we covered today, they have been quite an active topic of discussion here at the WTO as well. In the Committee on Trade and Environment, we have been talking about the trade and climate measures. Several thematic as well as interactive sessions have taken place in the last couple of years. So what we spoke about was a national perspective on how to deal with those issues in the context of the carbon market, which fits the Indian context and Indian requirements, and the NDCs, which is essentially around reduction of the intensity of emissions. And then the subject of standardization, of course, has been it's quite a common discussion topic in the Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade. Through the various triennial reviews in that committee, we have had thematic sessions over the last 3 or 4 years, which talk about climate and environmental standards. I have myself had the opportunity to moderate 2 of those sessions in 2023 and 2025. So these topics are kind of all interlinked and been a subject of conversation here in this room and in this organization as well. I will also urge you to refer to the session of Tuesday, which Japan and India organized on a related subject, which was around the whole aspect of how not to fragment the global trade due to these measures which are being taken. There were some interesting perspectives both from the developed world and the developing world on the same platform in that session. So thank you so much to all the speakers who have enriched us with the information on India's latest interventions to pursue the ambitious climate and environment goals. We are at an interesting stage, which is that we are running ahead of time, which has not been the case very often in this week. So I'm glad we have left enough time for comments and questions. So I will now invite those who are present in room D to provide any reflections on the presentations or if there are any questions. And also if it is for a specific speaker, then if you can indicate who do you want to direct the question to. Given that speakers are all in a room and they'll have to change the location, so I'll probably gather the questions so that we can have all questions to one speaker together. So perhaps I'll take a few interventions together and then maybe you can raise your hand because we don't have flags now. So Taka, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Ashish, and thank you for all the presentations, which I found really useful. I had 2 comments and a question. So the first comment is, again, I think it's this information is very useful and relevant for members of the Committee on Trade and Environment. So I would invite India to look into the possibility of sharing this information on an absolutely voluntary basis to the CT as well. And then the second comment is, I think the presentation really nicely, both of the specific measures nicely illustrates the way in which there's a heterogeneity of how we try to achieve our climate ambitions and targets. Even if we're moving in the same general direction of trying to reduce emissions, even if the specific tools are somewhat similar, there will always be differences. So I think that's a point that came through a lot in the presentation, and it's also very useful to keep in mind. And so the specific question is on the CCTS. So I guess the big difference between domestic ETS systems and CBAM carbon border adjustment is the focus on the product level emissions, so the so-called embedded emissions, whereas most domestic ETS systems would be at the facility level. So the question is, are there any plans to look into doing something at the product level within the CCTS, or is that not on the cards for now? Thank you.
Dinesh, you had a question?
Thank you, Ashish. And yes, I'm Dinesh Standaraja from the Australian Mission to the WTO. And thank you to the Indian Mission for the session today. And thank you, Ambassador, for the framing as well. I think noting the need for urgent climate action on World Environment Day and India's progress on its NDCs in this space, but also noting concerns about the trade impacts from some of these measures and the need to carefully balance these two priorities. I think it was good to hear the presentations spanning across multiple ministries, I think 3 ministries, showing in practice how government policies at the nexus of trade and climate require significant coordination. And also on this point, showing in practice the enormous effort from you, Ashish, to organize this session across the multiple ministries. So my thanks to you for that. I think for my question, I think it was the slides with the breakdown of policy design between India's measures and the EU's measures were very interesting to see. So my question was to all the speakers and panelists on whether they could expand potentially on what role they could see for the WTO to make a contribution for coordination in this area. Of course, the WTO being one forum within the broader international landscape, and whether they could see this through information sharing or efforts towards interoperability or coherence of these measures or systems, such as recognition of the CCTS. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Yes, hello. Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Sergio Valibrea. I am the EU Advisor on Sustainable Development in DigiTrade for the European Commission in Brussels, but I'm attending this meeting on my personal capacity. And I have also been the EU lead negotiator for the EU-India FTA chapter on sustainable development. So I'm actually mainly here to actually salute my friends from Delhi and hope that they will visit Geneva one of these days, and in particular Abhishek, with whom we have exchanged quite constructively during all these past years until our last meeting in December. I have a question also, which I could actually ask in Spanish because Abhishek is fluent in Spanish, but I will refrain from doing so. Although he may take actually the answer in Spanish himself. So my question, and first of all, yes, I would like to thank India for the interesting presentations. Indeed, it shows the commitment that we share in order to fight and combat climate change and the role of WTO and also trade in supporting this combat together. And this has been the subject of quite intense discussions over the last couple of years in the framework of the FTA, and this has also brought us together, I believe, in those discussions. And I am very pleased to see the movement in that direction. So my question to Abhishek would be, as India moves ahead into these objectives with the carbon credit trading scheme, the CCTS, on the 7 sectors that have been identified, and it sets ambitious target settings in order to reduce emissions or at least emissions intensity. Do you have concerns in terms of carbon leakage? And how would you then address this challenge, which is precisely that as we move ahead, or as India moves ahead tackling carbon emissions, the challenge would be that, of course, those emissions do not just move outside of the territory to countries which have maybe lower standards than the ones that India is planning to set up. So yes, so my question would be, how do you plan to actually tackle this challenge? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We can take one more question and then I can go back to the speakers.
Thank you, Ashish. Hello, everyone. My name is Colette van der Ven. I'm the Executive Director of Tulip Consulting. And we've recently been doing a big study on steel decarbonization in India. So this has all been really relevant. One question to the speakers is about India's CCTS. One of the findings that we made in our study is that there is a risk of an emerging green divide within India. And that could be also connected to the fact that right now, the entities that are targeted under the CCTS are mostly the larger entities, but not the MSMEs, which are de facto excluded from the scheme. So I'd be really interested in some thoughts on how the Bureau of Energy is considering to gradually include some of the MSMEs as well under the scheme, and how to potentially address any of the barriers related to monitoring, reporting, and verification issues, as well as access to capital, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colette. So I guess we have a few questions, and I'll just recap them for the benefit of Abhishek and Arijit. Most of the questions in this round were directed to the two of you. So one question was the difference of focus between the domestic systems, which is on facilities, and on CBAM type systems, which talk about embedded or product level emissions. So how do we see that that difference? Then there was a question on potential role for WTO and what kind of conversations can take place here to address the issues at hand. The third question was, would India have concerns on carbon leakage itself, and how do we see that playing out? And of course, Colette's question on the inclusion of smaller or MSMEs. So maybe we can have those questions, and Abhishek and Arijit, may I just invite you to respond with your comments.
Thank you very much. I hope we are audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And muchas gracias, Sergio, para tu pregunta. Y es un gusto verte una vez más. Quería visitar en Geneva esta vez, pero había algunas circunstancias que no pude. I'll speak in English for the rest of this rest of my interventions. Thank you for the question. Actually, my colleague, Mr. Sengupta, is more actually the specialist who can answer the question on the carbon leakages. And I will request Dr. Sengupta to respond on that, and primarily. Dr. Sengupta, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So maybe I just try to kind of answer one by one. So first question was, of course, related to CBAM regulations and the Indian CCTS, whereas in our case, it is focused mostly on the facilities, but in case of CBAM, it is on the product level. So I think I mentioned in the beginning as well that the key difference between the CBAM regulations on the European trade, the emissions trading scheme, and the Indian CCTS was that the ETS uses a cap and trade methodology, whereas we are using a baseline and credit methodology. And if you look at how the Indian CCTS has evolved, so of course, number one, we are assigning targets in terms of reducing their GHG emission intensity, and not reducing their overall output as such. So there are two aspects to it. One is, of course, it is directly linked to our nationally determined contributions. We have assigned ourselves the goal of reducing the emission intensity levels from 2005 levels initially by 33 to 35% by 2030. And then we subsequently increased it to reducing the emission intensity by 45% by 2030. And now, as we have seen from Mr. Abhishek's presentation, that we are now committed to reducing it by 47% by 2035. So we have been, of course, pertinent to mention that we have already reduced and achieved a significant amount of reduction. And this Indian CCTS is flowing directly from our earlier industrial energy efficiency scheme, which is named as the Perform, Achieve and Trade. So there also we are assigning targets to the industries in terms of reducing their specific energy consumption. So we have somehow transitioned from the perform, achieve, and trade scheme to the Indian CCTS scheme. So that is why our focus has remained on the facility level, and it is not based on issuing allowances or permits. Rather, it is based on giving carbon credit certificates for those units which are overachieving the targets. But definitely, moving ahead, as I mean, of course, this is the first phase of our Indian CCTS. We will also explore if we can move to a product level kind of a thing in the near future. A second question, of course, was related to like what role the WTO can play to kind of coordinate, and I think that's a very welcome suggestion, and definitely would look forward to any kind of coordination role that the WTO can play, and wherein we can learn the best practices from various emissions trading scheme across the globe, the various CBAM regulations that are there in the across in various countries. So definitely that will be welcome. A third was, before I go into the carbon leakage part, third question of course, how do we handle the smaller industries and the MSMEs particularly? So we have plans like to reduce the, so right now the 7 sectors, the obligated entities which are covered as part of the CCTS scheme are consuming or are emitting emissions beyond a certain threshold limit. So we have that benchmark in place. So in near future, what we are planning is that we are going to reduce those threshold limit gradually. Of course, this is the first cycle. So based on the learning and of course the overall infrastructure that will be in place after the first cycle, we'll gradually reduce the threshold limits for each of these sector, so that more smaller industries also do are included as part of the whole scheme. And of course, we are also keenly trying to see how to handle the MRV and capital related issues, particularly in case of MSMEs. And that is why we have kept right now the scheme is only for large industries. But as I mentioned, going forward, we'll definitely we have plans to reduce the threshold limit gradually. And even if you look at our Indian perform, achieve, and trade scheme, which is, you can say, the predecessor of the Indian CCTS. So there also we have gradually reduced the threshold limits for the large energy intensive sectors. So for example, if I take the example of iron and steel. So initially when the Indian perform, achieve, and trade scheme started, the threshold limit for identifying or including industries under the Indian PAT scheme was 30,000 metric ton of oil equivalent per year. That threshold limit we reduced to 20,000 units, MTOE per year. So we have done it in earlier cases as well, and we'll continue to do it for the sectors. So we'll gradually reduce the threshold limits. Now, coming to the question of carbon leakage, of course, this is something that we have now just started the emission trading, the CCTS scheme, and we'll look at the success of the scheme as of now, and then we'll take a call on how to address the issue of carbon leakages from other countries. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those detailed responses on the question on the WTO conversations. Maybe Dinesh, I can also add that this is there have been several forums here where we have got together for understanding each other's measures, and in fact the presentations today explain that maybe the pathways to our approaches are different, and that's rooted in our own context. But WTO provides a good forum to exchange these views so that at least we make ourselves aware of what's going on in different economies. And Sergio, your other counterpart from the negotiations, Devesh Gupta, says hi to you, and thanks you for attending the session. So he's also joined online. Any further? Yeah, please.
Thank you. My name is Peter Kovac from the EU delegation. I have many questions, but I will not ask many questions. I mean, we can do it. We can do it later on. There is one thing which came to my mind when I heard also the responses from the distinguished speakers. I understand the differences between our systems, CBAM and CCTS. but still what could be helpful, and I wonder if it is possible, whether in your system the domestic carbon costs under the CCTS could eventually be quantified at product level for exported goods. I mean, that would be pretty helpful for your industry, I think, if for those who want to export, for instance, to the EU.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any further questions in the room. So, Arijit, perhaps if you can please respond to the question posed by the EU delegate. Thank you.
Again, I'd say that currently we will look at the success of the first phase of our Indian CCTS. We are expecting to have the first trading completed this year for these sectors where under the compliance, which are covered under the compliance mechanism. And based on that, we'll continue to do our negotiations, and we'll look as to how the domestic carbon pricing vis-a-vis the EU CBAM can be developed or can be dealt with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have exhausted the comments and questions at this stage. So maybe I'll just invite the speakers to make any closing reflections, or if they want to comment on things which they may have missed earlier. And maybe this time we can go in the reverse order. So perhaps I can request Prasad to make any comments that you may have in closing. In short, please.
The only comment which can we have is that we have tried to do before the mutual recognition of standards, and we found that's not palatable to most countries. But what we can have is probably a platform to exchange the information based on which the product is certified among different countries in a common format. So that thing is probably the most doable, and where the WTO can probably play a role. So this is what I want to submit, because all certification is essentially a problem of exchange of information. The more harmonized the information exchange is, the better the clarity in certification of one or many countries. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasad. Arijit, may I please request you for your comments?
Spoken a lot, but the only last comment that I wish to make is that, as you have all noticed, that the Indian CCTS has made such a tremendous progress within a span of 40 months or so. So I hope that all the members take note of it, and it is being duly recognized and given the due credit in all international platforms. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And may I request Abhishek for your closing comments, please?
Thank you very much. And as my two colleagues have already mentioned, that India has been taking very strong strides in performing the nationally determined contributions. And we have been meeting our targets even before the timelines that we have voluntarily set. All we can request is to the international community to fulfill their commitments as well on the means of implementation, the finance and technology side, which will enable us to take even stronger strides towards a sustainable development-oriented future for everyone. And just one special comment for my friend Sergio. Sergio, espero que podamos verte una vez más en Nueva Delhi pronto. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. Finally, let me request Ambassador Anita Nandini for her closing comments on behalf of the Indian delegation and reflect on the importance of these conversations in the WTO.
So I think we are drawing to the closure of this session. I really want to express my deepest gratitude to our panelists for their illuminating insights, and definitely to all of you for your active, constructive engagement. Today's showcase of India's carbon credit trading scheme and green hydrogen standards underscores a vital truth, that is, developing nations like India are not just passive participants in this green transition. We are actively pioneering and in the regulatory and technical baselines which will shape the future. We only need the will to recognize each other's standards. The discussions we hold here in WTO, they definitely matter, because for the multilateral trading system to remain resilient, green trade frameworks must be built and based on collaboration, mutual recognition, and shared standards, not on unilateral or punitive barriers. With this, once again, I thank you for your time and your insights. Thank you.
So thank you, with which we now will end the session, the showcase session. I hope the session was useful in explaining the fast-paced developments happening in India and indeed around the world in a space that is so passionately debated here in the WTO, at the Committee on Trade and Environment, and also in the Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade. A big word of gratitude to the members of the WTO Secretariat who have facilitated the organization of an excellent session, especially with our speakers being online. And also this whole week, actually, I've been part of these weeks for the last 4 years, and perhaps this was the most wide and diverse range of topics covered this year. So kudos to the WTO Secretariat for their contribution. The Indian delegation is available to facilitate any further conversations on these subjects if you or your capital-based colleagues would want to know in more detail. Thank you so much. So maybe I can just use the gavel one last time to adjourn the session.